I mean, I think one of the interesting things whenever we talk about recession or economic downturn is that there are always going to be nuances to it. And those nuances are opportunities for marketers. And I think we start to touch on some of the approaches that get to those. But I think the conversation over the next 12 months is going to be an interesting one when it comes to, the things that we expected from consumer behavior that pay out and the things that surprise us. One of the things I always remember from one of the last large economic downturns was, luxury goods still sell. I think it's interesting when people think about the things of, we are all rational, we will tighten the belt in certain places. And actually, what they found was people are still going to buy well-made goods. They save for that and they buy cheap things. It's the middle bit that kind of gets hurt a lot of the time.
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS of the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. We are back, and we are back in our normal settings with a much better AV setup. Man, I listened to the episode last week. I really apologize to people who had to suffer through that. Hopefully it sounded okay live, but all trying to be in a room. Yeah, it was not the best. So apologies, but we are back and we have some fantastic news to take you through. We also have a fantastic guest in Mariette Ferreira, CMO of 11FS. Mariette, how are you?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this. It's only you that can get away with creating a platform just for ranting. So I like it.
Turns out people are somewhat interested in hearing other people rant. I see you're in the 11FS studio. Do you want to give a little plug for the studio?
Yeah, if I dig inside a studio, there we go. I'm trying not to do too much branding, but yeah, I'm in the dig inside a studio here at 11FS. This is where all the magic happens for us. So we record 3 podcasts here. Yeah, pretty cool setup.
And available for rent, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Inquiries, please. Ping me on LinkedIn.
There you go. All right. Jenna, you're back. You survived Cannes, Glastonbury. You canceled your trip to Venice. Couldn't handle it, but you're back in New York. How you doing?
I'm much less squeaky. I think that I was responsible for a lot of the audio from the AV feedback. That was not a normal human pitch last week. Much better. At home. May never leave my house again. Yeah.
Sounds like a good plan.
I think so.
Dubose, how we doing? You are actually in London today. Well, technically not London, but you're in the UK. Nowhere exotic.
I am, and I think you'll find I'm in Surbiton, which is like queen of the suburbs of London, technically still within the greater London area. So enjoying being back in the UK for a bit.
Oh, Queso. Is Queso with you?
Queso is with me. By the end of this, I will get Queso on camera to rebut some of the slanderous things that Jenna has been saying about him over the course of the last few weeks.
No, he's gonna bark on microphone, and everyone's gonna see what a little furry little asshole his dog really is, and it's gonna be very vindicating. I'm really looking forward to this. Let's get into it.
Moment of truth, Jenna. Moment of truth.
All right, sparks flying from the start. I love it. Let's get into it. So we got 3 stories to cover. We have one from Marketing Dive talking about Liquid Death, a challenger bottled water or canned water company out of the US that's been doing some interesting things. We have another article, maybe a little bit less exciting, but probably more important for everybody listening, from Mark Ritson in Marketing Week, talking about his recession playbook. So what marketers should do as we're facing into a bit of an economic downturn. And then lastly, from Bloomberg UK, Jenna, you teed this one up, so it'd be good to get your thoughts on it. We're going to talk about how Google's cloud customers will learn their Gmail carbon footprint pretty soon. I think there's a wider conversation to be had just around measuring and understanding and more transparency around the carbon footprint of technology and advertising and digital in general. So let's go. So starting with Liquid Death pranks taste testers with pricey but disgusting beverages. So basically, Liquid Death, again, you really should go check them out because they're doing some really interesting things as a challenger brand in the US. We wrote about them in Zag. I think it was last week that came out. But one of the campaigns that they did recently is they basically blindfolded people and had them either drink a can of Liquid Death, which is just sparkling water, flavored sparkling water, or a can of something disgusting. There was like squid ink and there was lobster bisque or whatever. So how are we feeling about this one, Jenna? I know you've got some thoughts. Should we start with you?
Yeah, again, this reminds me of the Moldy Whopper campaign in that I do not understand on a very, very basic level why you would want to communicate the association that like our water is better than squid ink. Like this seems like a case of like has like the creativity of this like gotten beyond like the basic point of that you're trying to convince people to
It
drink
smells like
your water.
advertising agency, doesn't it?
Yeah,
yeah.
like why do you want your brand associated with it? I don't get it. But again, the Moldy Whopper like just won, I think, an effectiveness lion, which I really question because I think that their sales have been down for like years, probably because who wants to think about mold on their cheeseburger? I don't know. I don't know.
Dubose?
It's funny, right? Like I think the Pepsi Taste Challenge is one of my favorite pieces of marketing of all time, but it was because Pepsi at the time got compared with Coke, which was the market leader. So the best that could happen is they beat them. The worst that can happen is they're seen as in the same consideration set. So if you were to take that logic and apply it to this, it doesn't really stack up. And I think it's like Jenna said, I think the Moldy Whopper is an interesting one in that, A, you can have your qualms with it in that it was entered into can, I think 3 years running now. And B, like obviously mold in food is a tricky one, but you at least get to the idea that there's an attempt there to communicate that there's not any preservatives, there's not any kind of chemicals in a Whopper. It goes back to the story. I'm sure the planner who came up with it had heard of, when McDonald's left Iceland, the last Big Mac in Iceland is in a bell jar in a youth hostel there, and it hasn't aged in years. It looks as if it was still placed there. And it's interesting because then there's a desired outtake of, okay, this is a natural thing that ages. Now the execution is questionable, but you at least get the lines there. And with this, I just don't get it because I think at the end of the day, it captures attention quite effectively in the same way like a movie, like a Jackass movie does. But I don't think it effectively sells water. And the funny thing is Liquid Death do a lot of amazing stuff. I imagine sometimes when you're trying to push in a lot of directions, there's going to be stuff like this that doesn't as fire as hard as some of the other stuff they do does.
Well, they're getting coverage for it, right? Like we're talking about it. So yes, there's kind of the level of like, is it as effective as possible as like a creative idea to deliver their marketing strategy? And then they, and Mariette, I'll tee this one up for you. Challenger brands like this seem to be very good at getting buzz, building buzz, getting press, this kind of guerrilla-y type stunts that get a lot more earned media attention than maybe they deserve just based on the idea and the content itself. So Mariette, what are your thoughts on this? And I guess that topic in general of how a lot of these challengers go to market in this guerrilla stunty way.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I liked it. Like, I did not hate it. I like it when brands don't take themselves too seriously. It kind of makes them a little bit more relatable and human. So there's a lot of sort of stunts that you go, really? But yeah, I didn't mind this. It was fun. And like you say, it's got agency written all over it. But it was pure. You can see it was an attention play. But it works. And you see that with challenger brands who have a higher appetite for taking risks, for trying things, because like almost they got nothing to lose. Like all they care about is cut through and getting attention. And then you grow up and you've got shareholders and you've got an existing customer base you have to look after, and you start going, oh, well, we have to take ourselves more seriously. We can't do these stunts. And, in our world in fintech, the classic example is, TransferWise 10 years ago, now Wise, running naked in the streets. Like, would they do that now? Probably not. Do they need to do that now? I don't know, maybe probably not. But even if they needed to, I'm not sure they would. But, like all you care about at that stage is cut through. So I think this does that.
Yeah. And you did. And when we were talking about it before we went live, you're like, oh, are they in the UK? And I don't know if that meant you were going to go to buy them, but it's interesting. Kind of leaning towards buying behavior there, or hearing about them because of this kind of stunty work that they did. All right. Solid conversation, everybody. I'm going to keep it even numbers because I've been called out for my math, adding up the points at the end of the episode in the past. 2 points to you, Jenna. Good answer. Mariette, 4 points. I like it. Dubose, you get 6. I really like you landing on kind of the effectiveness piece. And yeah, good job. Good job. All right. So rolling into the second story. So Mark Ritson, a marketing professor and I don't know, thought leader, guru. I don't even know what you would call him at this point. But he put out a recession playbook. So 9 steps that marketers should take to survive the dark times ahead. This was published in Marketing Week. I will not go through each of the 9 steps that he recommends people take. He did a nice, RECESSION for everybody. You can go read it if you want to. Yeah, exactly. A stretch maybe. But what do we think about his advice and the broader conversation around how marketers should be thinking about changing their strategies, tactics, if at all, as we face into a potential economic downturn? Dubose, I'm going to turn it over to you for first thoughts.
So I like bits of it. I have problems with other bits. I think I find like a lot of the early works from Marky Mark and the Ritzy Bunch. I think that the idea here is really, I like that we're approaching tactics to think about the recession. I like that we're attempting to quantify things brands need to consider. I like that we're getting under the skin of, not just kind of saying the sky is falling and actually getting to how you quantify the steps forward. There's one of them that really, really threw me there. And that's when he was starting to talk about failure. One of the ones he has in there is he was talking about people fetishizing failure as a step before success within advertising, and that the time to fail is over. And I think it's an interesting one because I think it makes it seem as if marketers and advertisers have been making a conscious choice to fail for the last few years for the fun of it, versus kind of, okay, now the time for that is over. And I think, when I see the binary discussion of failure versus success, I think that one for me, amongst a lot of them that raise good points, I think misses the point, which is, treating failure as this large thing that's either we've completely done it or we've completely lost isn't how most advertising and most marketing operates. I think a lot of it is, smaller things that could be better, learning from where you need to optimize. And I think that's incredibly important during a recession, probably more so than during boom times, because I think there's going to be a lot of changing landscape over the next kind of 18 to 24 months for marketers. There's going to be a lot of challenges that marketers haven't thought about yet. I mean, if you look at it this week, Kraft Heinz is in the UK currently out of Tesco because there was a price dispute over being able to raise the operating prices and Tesco not wanting to pass that on to customers. Those are the types of things where I think when we have a binary lens on failure versus success, it's very hard to navigate those issues, versus where we go, what we need to do is test and learn our way through this, understand everything as a hypothesis to respond to changing landscapes, and figure out, what's the best way to respond there. So overall, I think it's a mixed bag. I love anything that has a functional acronym. So points for that. But yeah, once I got to the end of it, I struggled a little bit.
It's basically acronyms, puns, and Simpsons references. Like that's the way to your professional heart, right?
It doesn't even have a functional. It's an acrostic, by the way, not an acronym. It's an acrostic.
Damn it,
it's not functional because Dubose, you said,
your MBA.
Yeah, whatever. I definitely learned that in business school and not from like English class. But it was not functional because Dubose, you went, the thing that stuck out to me most was like failure, and that failure is not the letter F does not appear in the word recession. So I don't really know.
It said not failing. Not failing was the thing. So
that's not functional. That's not functional. Okay, this is thumbs down. Thumbs down.
I will say, Mark Ritson will always have a special place in my heart for how aggressively he goaded Gary to try to get him to. Was it like a debate? What was he trying to get him to do? I think it was like debate him live somewhere or something like that.
I lose track because wasn't
it guy would want?
Wasn't it Bogusky wanted to wrestle him, like physically wrestle him, and then I think Mark Ritson wanted to debate him. And I always wish we could have swapped those two and had Bogusky debate him and Mark Ritson physically wrestle Gary Vaynerchuk, which I think we can still make happen.
Won that. I think Gary,
but he lives in like Tasmania, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he's like way off the grid. Mariette, any thoughts to add?
So I suppose confession. I'm a big fan of Marky Mark and the Ritson gang.
He should have told us that ahead of time.
No, listen, because he beats the drum about strategic thinking, and I appreciate that a lot. And I think to your point about here he's still trying to bring that, but then kind of going, there's a balance here of sort of strategic and tactical thinking when times are tough. I sort of, my takeout from this was slightly different, because this reminded me of just like a shout out to marketers that have profit targets, because I feel like a lot of the tactics that he's talking about here, like marketers working towards profit, are having to do anyway. Like, you have to balance the long and short. You have to be all over your numbers. You have to like balance brand, cost, acquisition, like all that stuff. And when the chips are down and everyone has to sort of think about, do they invest in long-term brand, like how do they manage their short-term tactic stuff. That's kind of what, like if you're a marketer working in a business working towards profit, which again in fintech, a lot of them aren't, you're just driving growth. That's what you have to do anyway, and it's tough. So I think there's a lot of companies and brands that will just switch very easily when they have to make those decisions differently in a recession.
So I'm curious to get everybody's thoughts on how should marketers be thinking about doing things differently, as we look at the rest of this year and what's coming in 2023 and all that from an economic standpoint. And actually, we're going to have a Rival Jams on this, so our virtual workshop series in September with the marketing professor from Imperial speaking about it. But from your perspective, given where we are right now, Mariette, let's start with you, and then we'll go around the horn. How are you thinking about this, CMO of a business, and how do you think other people should be?
Yeah, so a few things. So, again, to Mark's point, he talks about sort of, getting cheaper share of voice. We've seen that, during COVID firsthand, like continuing to advertise. We could access inventory cheaper and we benefited from that. So that's definitely a learning that I'll be taking into any sort of potential recessions. And then two other things. So first is, what is the opportunity here? And maybe, a cheaper share of voice is one of those opportunities, but what's the opportunity that comes out of this? And then second question is, what can I afford not to do? What can I afford to do? Because there's investment in channels and activities that if I stop them, can I really afford not to do them? So those are the two questions we'll be asking ourselves, like what's the opportunity and can we really afford not to do this?
I like that. Jenna?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like Mary, what you saying, can I afford not to do this? I do kind of like when there's like broader. That was not the correct way to phrase this. I really like it when there's broader, terrible economic conditions. Is that what I meant? I meant like the external pressure that things like that recessions represent do sort of like dictate that people get out of like just like their own like immediate like performance numbers, right? Where it's like, very often in agency world, we had so many conversations with clients where they were like, well, paid social isn't delivering me exactly the ROI that I want. Like, let's move this, wherever else. And you can kind of say like in market pressures like this, one, the way that you've been considering this is not entirely appropriate. You need to take a broader view of what your competitors and what like the larger market forces are, and if you can afford to sacrifice not having like this voice here. And so it does make those conversations a lot easier. But then, yeah, like I guess like on the not, was it really the end? Dubose was not failing.
It was
No more. N is for
recessive.
no more failure.
No more failures. Yeah, I kind of at least like that. Like, yeah, it also forces people to at least have some considerations for. All right, we know that we're going through a period of transition. We probably don't just want to jump off or like put one foot like off the cliff. We kind of want to edge through, and so people are a little bit more willing to like test, and maybe that they're a lot more constrained about it. But there is usually some recognition of, we have to go after a different set of consumers because there's there's more price sensitivity. How does that represent or manifest in our consumer behavior? And so seems to be a little bit more willingness to like test and consider those things, even if you got to be more mindful of the pounds and pennies than you usually are. But yeah, those are it for me.
Dubose, final thoughts on this story?
I mean, I think one of the interesting things whenever we talk about recession or economic downturn is that there are always going to be nuances to it. And those nuances are opportunities for marketers. And I think we start to touch on some of the approaches that get to those. But I think the conversation over the next 12 months is going to be an interesting one when it comes to, the things that we expected from consumer behavior that pay out and the things that surprise us. One of the things I always remember from one of the last large economic downturns was, luxury goods still sell. I think it's interesting when people think about the things of, we are all rational. We will tighten the belt in certain places. And actually, what they found was people are still going to buy well-made goods. They save for that and they buy cheap things. It's the middle bit that kind of gets hurt a lot of the time. And I think those types of insights, those types of opportunities are going to be the things that bear fruit over the next year. And I think it's going to focus us as marketers much more into thinking critically about consumer behavior and going beyond some of the things we just hold as true without really analyzing.
All right. 7 points for you, Dubose. 5 points for you, Mariette. 4 points for you, Jenna. So going into the last round, we've got Jenna, 6 points. But I've seen you cover some serious ground with points. So I know you got it in you to catch up. Mariette's at 9. Jenna, will you check my math here? Just make sure that I'm getting it right. Dubose, carry the 1. I think that's 13. So that's where we stand going into the third story. And if we have time, we'll go into the grab bag, which will give Jenna an extra chance to maybe catch up. So I don't know. I'm giving you such a hard time today. It's because I know you're jet lagged, and when you're on your A game, you won't let me do it. All right, from Bloomberg UK, Google's cloud customers will learn their Gmail carbon footprint. So Google's cloud computing division is preparing to reveal the carbon footprint for its workspace apps, including Gmail, Docs, etc. The move by Alphabet Inc., which of course owns Google and all the subsidiaries, is a push towards helping clients measure and reduce the gross carbon emissions overall. And Google has actually has committed to being completely decarbonized, or aims to be completely decarbonized by 2030. So Jenna, you surfaced this article. Why don't we start with you and your thoughts on it? You're on mute. Minus a point. I think that's going to be a standard thing. Oh no, I still can't hear you. It's just me?
No.
One more chance.
Oh, there was a mute
There
button on my microphone. I did not realize that. I was holding it a little far away because it still smells like my gym shoes. I really gotta stop.
What you need to do is get a stand for your bike.
Well, that too. But
We're
anyways,
a real business. We can afford to get you a mic stand.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. Maybe it won't get stolen from my house. My thoughts about this were that it's really, really amazing. And I'm really psyched. I'm not going to give Google a bunch of credit for being like altruistically minded about this. This is definitely happening because they're trying to stay ahead of government regulation, but who fucking cares? They're doing it. That's great. 2 thumbs. I can't hold both my thumbs up, but my 2 thumbs are metaphorically way the fuck up for this. Like right now, I'm really, really hyped. And I definitely like want to start seeing this. Like, we've been talking about this, a little bit behind the scenes, Eric, about like, hey, one, it is going to be a reporting requirement in a lot of countries that we start to quantify what carbon emissions are like for marketing spend. And when we were talking to, one of our dinner guests from Good Wings a while ago, it's really interesting that a lot of scrutiny has come for like carbon emissions for things that go through procurement processes, like traditional things that are easy to quantify, like we had to buy a fleet of cars, right, for for this, or like what's the quantification of our employee travel. But things like your email systems, or in the case of like marketers, like what are your ad serving like costs, right, where it's like how, the server hours that you incur in media buys and a couple other things. So it's really cool to start to see Google integrate this into their ecosystem. And since they're such a large part of the ad buying ecosystem, and that we know separately that this is such a big impact on the carbon footprint of individuals, this is really great. And I'm really excited. Rave for this. Good news.
How much of this do you think is getting ahead of regulation, playing the PR game, bit of a marketing stunt, versus them genuinely caring about that? And does it matter?
I definitely think that this is much more getting ahead of regulation and a couple other things, because like they mentioned in this like Bloomberg article that like, since of course like the largest carbon cost that they incur is the energy to run their server farms, right? But it isn't that Google tries to ensure that they're actually directly powered by renewable. It's that they buy like offsets, that they buy credits for these types of things. And I don't necessarily know that like in the markets that they operate in, that the one, credits are as auditable, that there's no like standard of regulation as to like actually how those things have to be purchased. This gets a lot deeper into like, the actual like how sustainable they're really trying to be and how authentic it is. And I don't think that they're really there yet, but this is a game of inches. inches and miles, I guess. So it does matter. It does matter. I know that analogy really didn't get there. But anyways, it does matter. I think that they're only doing this for like regulatory and compliance issues and not necessarily that they really care that much. But Google is actually a company of thousands of people. I'm sure that they have, individually varying opinions on this point.
Yeah. And it can make a difference. It kind of reminds me of that, thing that people say pretty often, which is like expectations and change don't only happen within a category. People talk about like the Netflixification of everything. Everybody wants like the personalized experience just for them. And in a way, like Google doing this, even for their cloud business, I think hopefully has a halo effect on other brands and other categories getting more serious, even if they don't face the regulatory pressure that Google might be for this coming up soon. Mariette, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I don't know. I read this a lot more cynically, and I don't mean to sort of trivialize the importance of the responsibility of these sorts of businesses, but I really struggle with this sort of Jenna, you touched on it. There's such a lack of consistency in how this is tracked and regulated, etc. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't start somewhere, but I just really struggle with big corporates pumping some money into a farm somewhere in the outback, and that's their offsetting. I don't know. This for me felt a bit like posturing, but I read this with cynical eyes.
How do you, in the fintech world, there's so many challenger brands that are coming up with a real focus on that, on CSR and environmental responsibility, all that. Do you have the same perspective there? Like, do you see, I guess what I'm trying to get to is, how do you see brands doing it successfully? Yeah. How do you see brands doing it successfully, or how should brands start to incorporate this type of theme in a way that's not inauthentic?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, but I think if it's sort of ingrained in your offering, in your product, if it's integral to how you operate, like what you actually take to market, you can't help but be authentic, because it's literally what you do and what you offer, rather than sort of a CSR add-on. So if it's embedded, then I buy it. If it's an add-on, then nah.
Dubose?
I think it's interesting in the discussion we've had around the intent of Google, for me, doesn't really bother me. I think I get excited about the idea that it's to stay ahead of regulation, and it's to be advantageous and more valuable to consumers. I think they must have had a look and gone, at this point, the conversation around consumers and climate change isn't if you believe it's real or if you believe it's terrifying. It's if we're doing enough. And I think naturally consumers are going to be looking in a lot of unexpected places to A, understand their footprint, and B, to be able to take more actions, because I think we're hitting diminishing returns in a lot of consumers' lives for a lot of the traditional areas where we've asked them to do things: consume less, recycle more, make sure you're buying circular products. A lot of people feel like they're already doing those things. So starting to find other places where you can start to have a bit of a greener footprint is really, really important. And I think this is an interesting shift there. I think that the intriguing thing for me isn't the fact that they're providing the information to people, though, because I think telling people, the carbon impact of something is lovely, but not super helpful nowadays. It's kind of like finding out that you've added on to the house fire a little bit. I think more you need to find out, what are you going to do about it afterwards? And I think the interesting discussion here is carbon credits increasingly are not going to be a good answer for that. If you're opening a good question to consumers, hey, here's what we're burning right now by doing this, you're going to need to then be able to go, and here's what we're tangibly doing to solve it. And I think it's exciting because it's going to, if done in a way where they really want consumers to buy into this, and, cynically so that they can have a marketing advantage, naturally the blowback of that is going to be them going, okay, so what are you doing about it? And I think that forces a bit more of the issue to be progressed. I think, like Mariette, like you said, I'm a firm believer that, doing the right thing as a business is great. Doing the right thing as a business because it's on the balance sheet is when I actually start to believe that a business is really going to do it. And I think that's an interesting evolution towards Google doing more of that, not just to be good or to not be evil, but to actually gain an advantage out of being more sustainable.
I guess the last thing I want to say is Dubose, you make some good points about like, oh yeah, obviously it can be both. Probably, they made this decision not just because they're afraid of like regulatorily, but they can see the advantages. I don't know. I also feel like sometimes, like when we talk about like brands or companies, like we only talk about them in like the very like monolithic sense of like Google as an organization. But obviously, when there are as many people who work for Google as they do, it is not as though that there is one consistent opinion about, frankly, anything at Google. Like, of course that there's, the way that the corporate entities, acts and structures. But I don't know. I'd be willing to bet that a lot of this probably comes from the many people who are decision makers that contribute to these things across a lot of different functionalities at Google. Like, it's becoming more I don't know, like professionally, socially acceptable to say, like, as a, we talk about this where it's like, hey, the way that I want the company that I work at to run, and in my capacity as a decision maker, want to make a different set of decisions because we all have to take action for climate change. And so I'd be willing to bet that probably that's, I'm sure that there is a big, organizational push for that, which is great. More people should be like that in their professional roles.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point with big companies, or particularly big companies, probably all companies. There's also the internal comms, internal pressure, employee side of it as well. And Google, that whole big pitch for kind of cloud computing for the Department of Defense that was a few years ago, if you remember, Google pulled out of it because of employee pressure internally. So great point, Jenna. I was going to give everybody 5 points. I'm going to give you an extra 2 points, but Dubose is still the winner. So rant or rave, and where is Queso?
Rant, and I will attempt to get Queso. Queso, buddy, come here.
And watch, he's not going to come. He's not going to come.
You go prove Jenna wrong. Yes, you
This
are.
is why
wow.
Wow.
He did
Hello,
it.
buddy.
Oh, there he is.
Okay,
How could you hate
so
that face?
I think first,
oh my God,
the rant is going to be about the fact that Jenna has massively misunderstood my dog, and he is very angry and wants to speak with you about this afterwards.
right now, I will say.
Exactly. Yeah. This is the nicest he's been all day. But I won't just spend a minute talking about the wonders of really sanguine Cavapoos, but instead talking about, oh, he's taking my phone now. But instead,
see?
That was
I think
more
it was
me
inadvertent.
than him. That was more me than him. He doesn't have a phone or thumbs, so he's jealous. But so I think one of the things I'd like to talk about, it's a rant about basically not-for-profit advertising. I think one of the things in charitable advertising, one of the things that's really struck me is, as some of you may know, and as Eric referenced earlier this week, we were at Cannes, and then Jenna and I relocated directly from Cannes to Glastonbury. Of which we just got back from on Monday. And I think one of the things that really struck me is, and I mean no disrespect to people at either, but I think it was one festival with not a lot to say and a lot of style in how they say it, and another festival that has quite a lot to say and didn't really have a great way of saying it. Jenna's already had to hear me complain about this quite a bit, but if you've ever been to Glastonbury... So if you've ever been to Glastonbury,
I thought it was obvious.
Before all the acts, they play basically advertising about all the charities and the great work they're doing, and the causes that are there. And what really struck me, and no disrespect to anyone who's made these, I think they are brilliant, but I find that it was interesting that they lacked a sharpness and a point. In the same way that a few days before, when we were at Cannes, you would find a lot of polish and a lot of style behind a message that was much, much less important and much less urgent. And so my rant this week is really just about the idea that I think, more and more when we're thinking about third sector advertising, when we're thinking about charitable advertising, I would love us to hold a standard there that isn't we're doing the right thing so people will pay attention, but is instead implies that actually people are quite apathetic about a lot of things, even those that are in a field at a cause centered marketing or a music festival. And we need a bit more of that punchiness and that marketing flair that I saw earlier in the week. So that would be my rant. Saving the penguins isn't enough. Why don't we layer 20% more of the creative brief on top of it so that we can make sure everyone actually pays attention to doing it?
Dubose, you were not supposed to come out of Glastonbury with a pro marketing opinion, my man.
That
was not the point.
You thought it was going to be like the Grinch Stole Christmas, the heart's growing bigger. No, just new ideas, just new things for campaigns
as well
this
as
year.
a pitch.
I think it might be. I'm happy to do any work there that may take us back to a field in Somerset at any point.
To be fair, we have talked about, obviously CSR nonprofit, that being kind of an element of how we want to build Rival. And there's different charities that we're a part of and contribute to and all that stuff. But actually, maybe we haven't talked about it, the three of us, but at some point, right now there's a lot going on, but at some point I'd love to do some pro bono work for charity. So maybe Dubose, you have an opportunity to actually bring some of that sharp pointedness that I know you love so much to the nonprofit world.
Here's to hoping.
All right. One more hello from Queso, or is he gone?
He's gone. He only does a few minutes in his contract.
He saw Jenna.
Doesn't do
He was like,
callbacks.
out of here.
Yeah, I think next week we'll see if you can co-host with me. We'll both be here the entire time.
We got to make the most of it. Well, I mean, he could replace Jenna, maybe at this point.
Wow.
See,
not
this
only
is what happens,
did I
Jenna.
spend 10 days with your stupid dog, feeding him liver every day. I can't with this. I was trying to take my job.
I just think it'd be great if he had like his own little panel on this. How amazing would that be?
Woof, woof.
We'd have to get rid of somebody though, because it can't be 5.
I want to see Jenna debate Queso for a full 30 minutes. We'll just.
You saw when I tried to feed him liver out of a tube.
You just didn't give him a strong enough argument to get the liver.
All right, I'm going to cut it off. Otherwise, this could probably go on for a while. That's all we got for today. Mariette, special thanks to you for showing up and hanging in there with us. I really appreciate it. It was great to see you.
Thank you so much.
All right, have a good one, everyone. Take care.
Yes, bye.
Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, Dubose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.